In this CSS exercise, we will be making something like this. It's a faded image effect where we have this kind of linear gradient that creates this feather effect on one side. We will also see how to do this on two sides or even on all four sides of the image. So let's get going and see how to do this. Again, as usual in our exercises, we have the HTML structure built for us, so we don't need to actually code in HTML. These elements are placed right here, so let's examine the HTML code first. We have a div with a class image, and inside this div we have an image element that has our image inside. So we will be using the class image, so let's go back to our CSS and let's start typing here. Let's make this image a little bit smaller so that we can see it. I will type .image that calls out our class, and don't forget to use the dot to call out a class. And then we want to target the image element. So I will type img and then I will open the curly brackets to start the CSS code. I will also close it here, and let's type here width. So I want to set the width to maybe 400 pixels just so that I can see the picture itself. And now let's get started with the effect itself. So for this we will be using mask image property. So I will type mask image, and then we want to use linear gradient. So I will type linear gradient, don't forget to include the dash. And then I want to open my brackets, and I will be typing some values here that first of all I want to define the direction of the gradient. So for example, we can do 180 degrees, which will create a the vertical gradient. We can also change this to any degree, but let's stick to 180 degrees. That's the first thing that we want to do. We want to define the direction and the angle. Then I want to type comma. And then let's start with, for example, black 60%, and you will see what these values mean. But for now, let's just type black 60% and then another comma and transparent 100%. And then let's close our bracket and let's close our code using a semicolon. So you can see what this means. Basically, the first thing we did was to define the angle. If I change this to be, for example, 90 degrees, it will switch to horizontal. I can change this to be 180 as it was. I can go to 270, which will basically change the direction of the gradient. But for now, let's leave it to 180 degrees. Then the next thing is black. Now black means basically we are using a mask. So the black means where the gradient should start. If I move this percentage to, for example, 80 degrees, 80%, you will see that the gradient starts a little bit later. So up to 80% of our gradient. So we started at the top, and then we are going towards our image, or like in the direction of the gradient. And at the point where we reach 80% of that direction, then it will start the fading effect. If I change this to be, for example, 20%, then it will start much sooner. So it will create this more subtle effect. So you can play with this value. Let's stick to our 60%. And then we have the transparency, so we will type transparent, and we want to get to be transparent at 100%. So once we are basically done, when we are going in the direction of our gradient, and when we reach 100%, in our case of the height of our image, then we are fully transparent. If you change this to be, for example, 80%, that will mean that this transparency will be reached much sooner. So basically from 60% in our case to 80%, we will have this fading effect. And then from 80% to 100%, it's basically completely transparent. But it means that this effect will be much less subtle. So let's stick to our 100% where we are fully transparent. Now you can play with these values as you want. One thing that I wanted to also mention is that instead of that, you are not just using mask image property, but you should also use WebKit mask image to be compatible with all browsers. So let's just copy this code, this line, and on another line after the semicolon, I will just use dash WebKit dash mask dash image. So we are using mask image with our values and the same values within WebKit mask image property. Just as I said, to ensure that this effect works with different browsers. Now let's see how to achieve this effect with, for example, on both sides, top and bottom, or both sides, left and right. And then we will also see how to do this on all four sides. If we want to do this on both bottom and top, let's just delete this WebKit mask image for now. We will be just working with mask image property. And if we want this to be to start with the fading effect on the top and then go fully opaque and then go back to that fading effect and full transparency at the bottom, in that case we can keep the 180 degrees, but let's in that case start with transparent. So transparent, and that would be at 0%. And then you can see already, if we leave it like this and we just include comma to separate the values, you can see that we are starting fully transparent at 0%, then at 60% we are fully opaque, and then again we are fully transparent at 100%. Now, if you want to create a little bit more of this, let's say, region where it's not transparent, we can just include another black stop here. So I can say go fully transparent at 0, then at, let's say, 20%, I want to be full color. So I will type black 20%. So it means that we reached 20%, which is somewhere here probably, and we are in full color now. Then we are continuing with this full color or this black mask. Again, black doesn't mean the color of the image. Black is simply the mask because we are using a mask on the image. And if you're familiar with Photoshop masks, black and white are usually basically how masks work. If something is black or white, it means that it's completely revealed or hidden. So at 20% we are starting our full color image, then we are going towards our 60% as we defined it here, where we are still at full color, and then we are starting our fading effect so that at 100% we are fully transparent. So you can play with these values, with these percentages, however you want to create different effects. Maybe we can switch this to 10 and we can start going fully transparent a little bit later, so maybe like 80% and so on. And if you want to do this effect on all four sides, then basically you need to use two linear gradients, because linear gradient works with, as it says, line, so it's linear. But if we want to do this effect on all four sides, we need basically two lines, or let's say two axes. So let's change this to be on all four sides. I will keep this effect that I have, this mask image with linear gradient. But let's just now use another linear gradient within the same mask image. So once we are done with defining this linear gradient, after the bracket, when we close the bracket, but just before the semicolon, because we are still within this mask image line, let's type comma, and I can use actually another line just to make the code a little bit more legible. And here I will type another linear gradient, and this time I will be defining it in the other direction. So we are using 180 degrees, so I think that we will probably be needing 90 degrees, which is the horizontal direction this time. And let me just close the bracket so that we can see our previous code, doesn't matter. And let's now stick to our 90 degrees. So in our case, again, let's start with transparent at 0%. Then let's go to maybe black at 30%. Then we want to continue with the black or full color until we reach, let's say this time 90%. And we want to reach our transparent part of the image at 100%. Now you can see that right now it doesn't really work that well. And the reason that it doesn't work is that we need to include something else here. We have two linear gradients, but we need to tell to CSS how to combine these two linear gradients. So for this we will use another property. So we are outside of our mask image property. We are not defining the mask image anymore. So I will open a new line after the semicolon and I will type mask composite, and this will be intersect. And what this does, as you can see, is that it merges or it intersects these two linear gradients to create the effect that we want. Now the last thing that I want to do is simply to copy this code that I have on a new line and use it as a WebKit mask image, as we saw previously. And the last thing that I also want to do is to, in order to have this mask composite, I want to actually use also WebKit mask composite. And in my case, I will use something called destination in. It's simply a value that corresponds to intersect in other browsers. So that's it. That's how you can create this kind of fading image effects in CSS.